housing is not a right, says the Ontario Court of Appeal, which has quashed a landmark charter challenge on the right of the homeless to affordable housing in this country. And the decision centers on a case back to 2010 involving 4 homeless Torontonians and a homeless advocacy group who were arguing that housing is a fundamental human right. Well, it's not, apparently, according to the court. Let's bring in Matt Gurney to talk about a decision I find could have some wide-reaching implications coming, because this is going to go to the Supreme Court of Canada, because one of the judges actually ruled in favor of this out of the 3.
Yeah, and what was interesting about this case is I think what one of the judges that said it was not a right also said something I thought was very important. She had written, it's interesting. She basically said the court can't even decide this because it's such a big issue. Any decision we make will have such sweeping implications. It is beyond the ability of the court to do so. Because, I mean, just to her point, imagine if the court had said, yes, housing is a right.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That means that you shouldn't be buying your house. You should be waiting for the government to give you that
It
house.
would have such sweeping implications for society that I think the judge probably made the correct call, which is, you know what, if we impose this, it's going to result in an absurdity. It would take us well past what any law has ever suggested. We can't do this. But
it would change the housing market in the entire country.
I think probably to a certain extent it wouldn't have any immediate effect, except people who are out of housing or in low-income housing would be able to say, where's my guaranteed housing? Where's my rent supplement? I mean, I don't know exactly how it would work. Maybe it would be a subsidy or better access to affordable housing. I don't know how the courts would choose to interpret it, but it's a gigantic ruling. It's reminded me of discussions we've had before. Is having a job a right? According to some people, they would say, yes, everyone has the right to a job. Where I've always gone more for, no, everyone has the right to seek a job and to seek employment and to seek housing. But, you know, it has been discussed, for instance, I mean, I know that there have been discussions at international groups before, and certainly within North America and national or state or provincial levels as well, the idea of 100% employment. Everyone has a right to have a job. It sounds great in theory because we want everybody to have a job. How would you actually make that the law? And that brings in the question as well of housing. If everybody has a right to a house, okay, let's just grant that point. How do we wrap our minds around that? What would that even look like? Would we have entire buildings of government-owned apartments? I mean, kind of not just affordable housing, but also mandatory housing where, hey, homeless person, you get to show up at the door and say, hey, I'm homeless, I need a house to stay in tonight. And we'd have to go, okay.
But we also, as you well know, in an urban center like Toronto, we haven't got that enough built.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it goes beyond that, or I worry it goes beyond that, because this movement will then, I think, do students have the right to affordable housing? Or to those who make under a certain amount of dollars, do they then have the right to affordable housing? Well, the bottom line is when you get into big cities like Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, Montreal, Toronto, housing is expensive here. What is affordable housing? When the market sets the price, but what is affordable housing? And at what point is there a provision put in place to suggest
well, I mean,
how it would work?
I think probably, I mean, an economist or certainly a banker might tell you affordable is no more than 30% of your income. So, you know, a family or an individual, I mean, for example, when you're trying to qualify to get a house mortgage, they'll say, well, can you afford mortgage payments? Does it exceed 30% or maybe a third of your total income? If so, you can't afford this. That's unaffordable. Now, banks are sometimes willing to make exceptions, especially if they get to own your house at the end of the day. But you know, I think that would be the metric. And then I think you're quite right. I mean, it would also come down to the issue of timing. I mean, if you are, for instance, a student and you don't have any place to stay for the summer, let's say maybe you're going to school in Toronto 8 months a year, your family's back out west, for instance, do you have a right to that housing for the remaining 4 months of the year? You can rent them at school. I knew people when I went to school, they were from out of town, they would make arrangements with the school. They'd get to stay in their dorm room over the summer, right? They would pay rent and they'd stay in town. Would that suddenly become a right? Can you charge someone a market-based fee or even some equivalent to it for something that's a right? This is why I'm much more comfortable with the idea that everyone has a right to seek housing. And also you have laws that prevent things like discrimination or predatory landlords. There's ways of going about this. But I mean, even though everyone should have a house, I agree with that. We don't want homelessness in this country. The idea of a mandatory right to housing, I wouldn't even know how to begin enforcing it.
I wouldn't know, but I wouldn't be comfortable with it.
Well, someone would find a way.
Well, they will. And that's what concerns me about this decision, because it will go to the Supreme Court, because in the the judge who decided that the case raises some charter questions, she had said it is brought by counsel on behalf of large, marginalized, vulnerable, and disenfranchised groups who face profound barriers to access to justice. It raises the issue that are basic to their life and well-being. But anyone can argue, theoretically, that, you know, what you have, maybe I want that too. You know, I'd love the $20 million estate. I have a right to that. I have the right to afford that.
For the record, I don't have that. I mean, I would love to have that.
I don't have that either, I assure you. But what's to say it's not going to stop other groups from jumping on the backs of this? We've seen these arguments go across in Vancouver, where you'll get groups who truly fundamentally believe that if you've got that, I deserve to have that too.
You'd have to define what housing meant. For instance, I mean, probably it would be more than a shelter. You couldn't go into a homeless shelter.
But shelter and housing are two different things. You have the right to shelter. We provide shelter. A lot of people who are homeless don't want to go into the shelters. They don't like the shelters because they don't like the crime and they don't like things, germs and getting sick.
Or bluntly, as we know, they're not always of sound mind.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is there for you.
So yeah, you'd have to almost figure out, I mean, what would be the minimum standard? Would there be a square footage? What would be the privacy rights? Who would own it? Would you be obligated to pay any of the money? I mean, one of the rare areas where I'm sometimes more inclined to indulge in a little bit of socialism myself is that some cities in the world have found that having mandatory housing for the homeless is one of the best ways to treat it, because they say a lot of people, you know, there's kind of, you break down the homelessness into two groups: the entrenched homeless, who are not only difficult to put into housing, they'll almost resist it, and then there's the people whose economic circumstances, driven by financial failure, emotional issues, substance abuse issues, become homeless, but they don't have to. They have that first night that's you're homeless, and then it's another, and then it's a week. Some of those people, they've found, if you can just house them, if you get them into basically a place to stay, a warm bed, a shower, a refrigerator with some food in it, then you can address the other issues, the emotional issues, the financial issues, the substance abuse. It's been effective in some cities. I'm open-minded to that. I mean, when it comes to this sort of thing, I just want what works. I'm very, like, whatever it takes to fix the problem, I'm willing to do. But does it become permanent then? Does it become endless? Is it just something where we'd say, okay, you've been homeless because you had maybe a nervous breakdown or you suddenly lost your job? You know, I'm okay saying we're going to put you up for free for a couple of months. We're going to get you back on your feet.
We've seen what the welfare system did. It was supposed to be a temporary fix and becomes a permanent problem, and people become used to it, and we don't kick people off of it. It becomes expected.
And you can never take it away.
Well, you can't. And we're in this phase right now of income inequality, and we're hearing about the Russell Brands of this world demanding that everyone, this 99% versus the 1%. And so I'm concerned that this movement is going to just become the expectations, and we're going to build it in.
And the irony of it is, homelessness is actually probably one of those issues that is completely nonpartisan, and that everybody wants to fix it. No one thinks it's a good thing for the city. No one thinks it's a humane thing for the people out there.
It's those who take advantage of it and ride the backs for their own cause.
Yep, and it's an intractable issue, not because it's insolvable, but because no one really wants to touch it because it gets too political. I've always had the perspective of get them off the streets, find out what their needs are, keep them safe and warm at night. If they need a hand up, there are charities who might help with that. If they have more fundamental drug or medical or psychiatric issues, let's deal with those. But I've always found it embarrassing that in a city as rich as Toronto or a country as rich as Canada that we still have homelessness. It's something that's always
it doesn't make sense. But you also know that there are activist groups who take pieces of land, they build their own tent cities. We saw it in Vancouver, or Occupy with these movements where they actually truly think, this land is my land, I'm just going to put my tent there, and we can't seem to move them out. And those are the people that I worry would take advantage of this and truly take away the housing that we need for those who can't afford it.
Occupy in a building?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It's going to go to the Supreme Court anyway, so we'll watch it.
It'll take a while, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. All right, Matt, appreciate it.
Thank you.